You thought this was the secret Roger Waters
Yeah,
biography that was getting
big
shown
time.
here that took
Yeah,
place in 86
yeah.
when the song was written in 79. I got you. Hey, everybody, I'm David.
And I'm Milan, and welcome to I Finally Watched, where we talk about movies that at least one of us has never seen before. And today, I finally watched The Squid and the Whale.
A quick rundown of The Squid and the Whale. It stars Laura Linney and Jeff Daniels as a couple that separates and divorces. And it just shows the impact it has on their kids, who are played by Jesse Eisenberg and Owen Kline, who I don't know if I've really ever seen Owen Kline in anything else. This is kind of what I know him for. So that's like just the 1,000-foot view of this movie. But Alon, what did you think? You know, I really wanted you to watch this. I really like all of Noah Baumbach's movies. I really thought Marriage Story was great. A similar kind of story because it involves a divorce, but this one may be a little darker, and I really want to get your opinion on it. So what did you think with your first watch?
Yeah, I really like Baumbach, although I've never seen Marriage Story. I saw his other film, The Meyerowitz Stories. Now it's occurring to me that both of those titles have the word story in them. No,
Just
but
connecting dots all over the place here.
I think it's a conspiracy. Yeah, no, I really liked it. I liked it just as much as I liked the Meyerowitz Stories, which, I mean, it's the only film of his I have to compare it to. So I'll be doing some of that. But the thing with Baumbach that I saw is you have these characters and they interact with each other, but then as they go on, you know, there's separate ways. You know, some go to school, the kids go to school, the parents go to work, and you see how the turmoil of their life affects them in their private lives. And then towards the end of the movie, you have this like inciting incident that who knows what the hell is going to happen. And so when this kind of comes around at the end of the movie, I was getting really excited because remembering Meyerowitz Story, I was like, oh man, something big is going to happen to these characters. And I was just kind of excited to find out what. None of these characters are great people. No one really has anything greatly redeeming about them, and everyone has a lot of reasons to hate these people. So I got to the end. I was like, oh, this is going to happen. What's happening here? Oh my gosh. And I was like, yeah, I hope it's kind of something bad because I just didn't like these characters.
Yeah, and that was what I remembered about the movie. I haven't seen it in years, and so rewatching it today, I remember that it's just a lot of awful people. Although rewatching it and being a little older now, you know, I feel bad for the kids because the youngest kid, Frank, is just really kind of lost and really affected by the divorce of his parents. And you can tell what I think is great about this movie is like the opening minute, there's this tennis match. And it sort of tells you all you need to know about the characters in this movie. The Jeff Daniels is just a very pretentious, unfair, needs to be the center of attention, needs to be the most important person in the room. You know, that's his character. And Walt, played by Jesse Eisenberg, just worships his father. You know what I mean? And Frank, the youngest, just loves his mother, doesn't really see eye to eye with his father that much. And, you know, that's why they show you the teams that they play on in tennis. And that's kind of the teams going forward of, you know, who loves who the most. But watching it again, I felt sorry for the kids. I felt sorry for, you know, Frank's young enough to where he can kind of overcome wiping his stuff all over the school. But Walt, you know, he's in kind of his formative years, and he worships this guy that's just a jackass who gives him horrible advice, gives him a horrible example, and he's kind of, for a while in this movie, thrown away a relationship with his mother because he's so mad at her for ending the marriage. He blames her. He doesn't blame his father at all.
Yeah. You know, Baumbach must have had like one ass of a dad because he writes asshole dads so well. You'll see when you watch the Meyerowitz stories. Maybe you can answer me this in Marriage Story. Is there like an asshole father figure anywhere about?
No, I think Marriage Story, it depends on obviously your point of view. Marriage Story is more, I think you can kind of see all the sides a little bit.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think it plays it, this is, you say there's no one that's really good in this movie, and Laura Linney cheats on her husband, cheats on Jeff Daniels throughout the last 4 or 5 years of the marriage, and so that's not cool. But also hanging around with Jeff Daniels for this movie's only 75 minutes long, which is just crazy to me because it's so dense, it's so uncomfortable to watch.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
hanging out with him for that amount of time, I was like, yeah, I would cheat on you. I would totally not want to, like, I'd want to get out of there because that was rough.
No, I mean, I do want to add, you do feel really bad for the kids because they're just kids and they're mirroring their parents in a way, who really don't have an excuse on, why they're a bad person. I guess everyone has an excuse on why they turned out the way they turned out, but damn it, they're adults. Um, with the kids, it's funny to see Frank, the smallest one, not really adopt anything from his mom. I mean, maybe like a hyper sex drive, maybe.
Maybe.
Um, but he gets to the point where he's looking at himself in the mirror. He's like, because of the divorce, like he doesn't even want to look like his dad. But his anger, he doesn't want to look like his mom either. You know, when he's like, I have your cheekbones, right, mom? And she's like, no, you have your dad's bone structure. And he's like, well, you're ugly. It's just, there's so much hate in that, which I just found so interesting. And then it's the opposite with Walt.
Yeah, what I think is interesting about the way the characters are kind of shown is the unlikability from the male characters, the two sons and the dad, is in just hearing them talk and the way they go about their daily life and just how they treat other people. Whereas the reason you don't like the mother is just because you find out what she's done. If the audience doesn't hear that she's cheated on him, I don't know that you're probably just siding with her the whole time. And in the end, not that it's a competition, but I can kind of see, I see why she strayed. She could have obviously handled it better. But even I think Walt sort of begins to understand that too. Um, just
Right.
because Jeff Daniels only cares about himself in this movie. Um, he's he he's only out for recognition for himself. He doesn't like if his wife gets any recognition. He's only out to fill his carnal needs. He just gives horrible advice to Walt all the time. So
Yeah, I want to talk more about how Walt mirrors his dad in a lot of ways too. Like, there's a lot of, in Jeff Daniels' character, there's a lot of self-importance, feeling self-important. And that is a horrible, horrible personality trait to have. And he passes that down to his son.
well, Walt just cares so much about what his father thinks of him. He starts dating this girl who way out of his league, but he doesn't seem to realize that. And he asks his dad, "Oh, what do you think of her?" Initially he's like, "Oh, she's not pretty, but she's cute." Like, I'm wondering if I should be with a pretty girl. And his dad's like, "Oh, you'll have time for pretty girls later." And then later on, after his dad meets her, he's like, well, "What do you think? Is she pretty enough?" She's like, and his dad's like, "Yeah, she's pretty. Not for me though. No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't go after her." But you should have sex with her first, at least before breaking her up. Try her out. She's like just bad advice.
Bernard is a bad dad, and he kind of has all these regrets about his younger days. You kind of understand throughout the story that he met his ex-wife when he was a lot younger. He was married twice before.
When was annulled? That doesn't count.
Fine. He was married once before. And throughout his stories, he's like, oh, I had this chance to sleep with this really pretty girl. She was really sexy. And then his son is like, oh, why didn't you? And he's like, I was with your mother. And he's like, okay.
Yeah, he kind of met her like right at his height when he could have been womanizing, and he now regrets, like, why didn't I had all this social capital that I didn't spend. I was just with one woman.
Yeah, and he's trying to pass this advice to his, like, how old is Jesse Eisenberg in this movie? Like 17, 16?
I mean, I don't even know that they even show him drive, right? So I mean, he could be
15?
He was 22, 23. I think he's trying to play like 15 to 17 probably.
Yeah. You're trying to be like, oh, just have as much sex with as much women as possible to this 15-year-old kid, which is a horrible thing to say as a parent, especially when the kid is trying to confide in you about his girlfriend. But that goes on to so much more than just love advice. He's like, oh yeah, this person. My favorite part of the movie is where he's trying to explain to Frank, which in turn gets kind of over on Walt, what a Philistine is.
Right.
And it's like this uneducated person who doesn't enjoy like dense, complicated books and films and stuff. And Walt does not want to become a Philistine because his dad obviously looks down on these kind of people who can't understand Frank Kafka and Hemingway, yeah, and Fitzgerald and stuff like that. And then his other son, Frank, is like, yeah, I'm a Philistine. And then his dad's like, no, you're not. You enjoyed this film and this book. He's like, no, I'm a Philistine. And it's just to kind of, he knows that it gets to his dad.
Well, the other thing that I thought was great about that too is his Walt wants to impress his dad so much and wants to be so much like his dad. So he talks about books and movies like his dad, similar to someone I know, talks about things as if he's read them or watched them and hasn't. And I really love when in the end, I didn't name names, but I love when his teacher's talking about him at the end, and Bernard's like, well, he wrote, I saw his paper he wrote on The Great Gatsby. It was marvelous. It's his favorite book. And the teacher's like, well, it's very clear from what he wrote that he's never read that book. And then
right.
And then he tells Sophie when he's trying to woo her about Metamorphosis and Kafka, and then she reads it and she's like, oh, what did you think about the end? And it's very clear that he never has read this and probably doesn't read all that much. He just knows enough to be conversant and wants to exude, the same way, exude the same aura that his father has.
I think one of the ways that this is most hammered in the movie is you see him practicing the song on the guitar. He does like a little demo for his parents, and I'm listening to it and I was like, yeah, that song is by Pink Floyd. And then he's like, yeah, well, I wrote it. And I was like so confused because no one called him out on it. And I was like, is this a secret biography of the guy who actually wrote the song for Pink Floyd? To the point where he does it, he performs it in his talent show, and he wins the talent show as like he just played and sang an original piece. And it's Hey You by Pink Floyd, which is one of their like most famous songs. And it's not like he's from like a small Christian town where they don't believe in rock and roll. He's from Brooklyn. to the point where I had to look up the name of the guy who wrote that song. And I was like, well, is it a secret biography about him? Because no one brings attention to it. And then they finally do. They call him out on it. He's like, yeah, he plagiarizes like a whole bunch of crap. I'm like, whew, I thought I was really missing the point there. I thought at one point, like, oh, maybe Baumbach has set this in some sort of world where that song doesn't exist and he's just kind of given it to Walt. But yeah, he plagiarized it and they called him out on it.
You thought this was the secret Roger Waters
Yeah,
biography that was getting
big
shown
time.
here that took
Yeah,
place in 86
yeah,
when the song was written in 79. I got you. Yeah, I like how Lily, who's kind of the student of Bernard and is staying at their apartment, kind of says, oh, I want to talk to you after the talent show. Come by my room. And then kind of explains it to him like, yeah, I've done what you just did. I've plagiarized before. I really hope you don't get caught. And then in the end, when he's meeting with the tennis coach played by Billy Baldwin, who's also now the love interest for his mom, he's like, I didn't write that. Pink Floyd wrote that. And the guy, and he was at the concert too. He's like, I know, my brother. I know. Which also brings me to like my favorite character of the whole movie was Billy Baldwin as Ivan, the tennis instructor.
It's funny because this movie is such a small movie in terms of location and characters, and there's not like huge CGI explosions or anything. It's just a very like simple story that's told incredibly well. But you have these actors in it like Jesse Eisenberg, Jeff Daniels, Billy Baldwin,
And Laura Linney.
yeah, and even Anna Paquin shows up. Not in like a huge role, but I mean it's freaking Anna Paquin.
Which I mean, at this
It's
point, she had been rogue twice, so she wasn't a nobody.
yeah, she was like I think a couple years away from True Blood, but yeah, it's just kind of such an interesting story being told with all these characters. And then, so I think before we talk about the ending, we have to talk about the fact that because of the father's self-importance, he kind of passes that on to his kids, where it's like, they're going through this really trying time. They're going through a divorce. And he's, whether he admits it or not, is being affected by it greatly. His wife is being affected by it greatly. And then his kids are probably being affected by it the most. And he kind of chooses to ignore that. Like, it's his kids, he's perfection, so therefore there's nothing wrong with his kids. And then there's like this PTA meeting, and it's like, yeah, so your youngest son is spreading his semen everywhere in the school, and your oldest son is plagiarizing Pink Floyd and basically like stole $100 from the talent show.
Yeah,
And
and his response to that is, "Oh, it's probably other kids are doing it too." And the principal's like, "Well, maybe, highly unlikely." And then like I said before, the
it's
gas leak
just
thing.
yeah, it's deflection after deflection after deflection for him, for Bernard, to the point where he's like, oh, and I hated this too. He goes into like Jesse Eisenberg's room, and he's like, yeah, so your mom and I talked to your principal, and I think you're gonna have to see a therapist. And Jesse Eisenberg is like, I don't have to see a therapist. There's nothing wrong with me. Kind of adopting that same perfection and self-importance as his father. And then his dad like doubles down on it. He's like, yeah, you don't have to see, like, there's nothing wrong with you, you're perfectly normal, you don't have to see one. He's like, okay, cool, then I'm not gonna see one. And his dad's like, yeah, but you're gonna go see one.
Yeah, you have to.
And you have to. But I hated it because it wasn't like, what you did was wrong, son, and you have to go and own up to that. No, it wasn't that. It was, yeah, there's nothing wrong with what you did, but they're making you do it. And that, I don't know, that sucked to me.
I also like how after he meets with one of his teachers, he goes to Walt and he's like, he probably doesn't even know that I'm a published author. And then when he tells him he has to meet with the shrink, he's like, oh, he probably has like a BA or something. And then, it cuts to the shrink. He's like, well, I have a master's. And he's like, but not a PhD, right? Walt asks. He's like, no, not a PhD. I have a master's. But what I really love about the scene with the shrink is that in about 2.5 minutes, he breaks down Walt into like confessing this lovely memory he has with his mother. And I was like, damn, that shrink's good. That was so quick.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, because that scene kind of caught me off guard because so the shrink wanted to kind of open up the session with him admitting that he plagiarized Pink Floyd. And while he admitted that, kind of, he was like, yeah, but I felt like I could have written it. So really, I'm just cutting out the middleman, which is insane. It's insane. And then he's like, okay, well, let's start with a happy memory. And so Jesse Eisenberg gets into this story with his mom, going to like the museum. And at first, when it starts out, I'm like, is he plagiarizing from something? Like this was way too easy to pull that story out of him.
Well, what I really liked about that scene too is he's like, is that just shrink 101? You asking me for a happy memory? And the guy's like, yeah, but can you just do it?
Yeah, it's so easy.
And then right after, this session with the shrink, he determines that he needs to break up with Sophie because he's going to go after Lily. And then he goes into the bedroom, into her room to talk to her, to try and make his move, presumably. And his father's in there and says something rather vulgar that you don't want to hear your father say to a 20-year-old woman that you're trying to woo, and then just runs off.
Mm-hmm. And jumps in a lake.
Dunks his head, which his mother said was disgusting, and then sort of leads to this climactic scene where Walt, comes back and comes in the house, and once he sees Walt had come back, and then Bernard's seeing that Walt came back. He comes in the house and he's like, all those things I did for you, cooking, cleaning, showing more attentiveness towards the end, none of those mattered. And she's like, you didn't cook. And then he's like, well, if I had, would that have mattered? And it kind of leads to the scene where once again, Bernard just kind of shows his selfishness and he's like, it's my night with the kids, I'm taking them, and neither of them want to go. Which while watching that scene too, I thought, early on he has a scene where he's with Laura Linney and he tells her, you called my father, and she's like, I did. And he's like, yeah, he kind of told me that maybe we still had a chance, but I told him, I've done everything I can. And it's like in that moment she was softening, and maybe if you had said, listen, I'm sorry, and he's just like, nah, I had done all I could. And so in the ending, it's way too late because he actually tries to do that and she just laughs in his face. And then it leads to Bernard having a heart attack because there's so many things that make him angry. The cat runs away. He's getting a ticket from his car. Joan's boyfriend shows up, and it's just this whole night has been too much for him. And he has a heart attack that he just says he was tired because he can't have heart attacks.
Right, because it's that self-importance that he's better than a sickness that kills like a lot of people. Baumbach creates this like really sickening character in Bernard, and to the point I feel like you feel bad for him. There's moments where you just feel bad for how out of touch this guy is with his family. And then he like sexually assaults this 20-year-old roommate he has, and it's like, oh, I don't feel bad for the guy anymore. He's just through and through an a-hole.
Well, he's so pathetic.
He's really pathetic, and that's that part where you feel bad for him. And you know what, I would even say if it was left up to that, where he was pathetic in his own right, then I almost couldn't be mad at him, because I would just feel sorry for him. But the way he demeans and it affects his kids and his wife, that's the part where it's just really easy to not feel bad for him and to really hate the guy.
And it's to the point where he's even pathetic in the end, because Walt is with him in the hospital after this heart attack. And that's a moment where people can kind of reevaluate what's important. And he still can't, because Walt says, hey, I want to spend more time with my mom. You know, it's after this breakthrough he had with the therapist where he tells this happy memory about how his mom used to take him to all these events, and specifically this museum where they had, from the title, this giant squid and this whale that were fighting, and it was always too scary for him. And so he's in the hospital with his father, and his father's like, no, I don't want you spending any extra time with your mom. You know, I have my nights and she has hers. And so Walt just sort of leaves, and you see him running, and then he kind of makes it to the museum, and then he goes up, and it's the ending's kind of is very beautiful in that he's just staring at this giant Squid and the Whale, and he's finally not scared of it anymore like he was when a kid, when his mom had to explain it to him. It's kind of just this, I just thought this symbolism of, you know, his growth a little bit. One, growing away from his father, being able to get, you know, his father told him he wanted to stick around, and he was like, no, I want to do what I want to do. And, you know, that's kind of be closer to mom. And then he grows as, you know, one, wanting to get back to this moment where he loved his mother, and two, not being scared anymore of this thing that scared him so much as a kid. So the way that all wrapped up with the story with the therapist to him actually going to the Squid and the Whale, I thought was really, really cool writing.
It was really beautiful. There's moments in the film that don't really spell it out for you as the audience. You kind of have to guess or figure it out as the movie goes on. One of the things that I didn't um, quite understand, or maybe I understood wrong, does Bernard ever become physical with his wife? And the reason I ask that is because, like, right before they announce their separation, he she's writing in her book, and he comes in and he's like, "Did you take the advice that I gave you?" She's like, "Some of it." And then he's like, "Well, does so and so die in the end?" And she's like, "Yep." And he's like, "Well, you didn't take the advice that I gave you." And then the phone rings and she goes to pick it up. And in the most like aggressive way, he slams the phone back down, and it cuts to the kids trying to sleep, and their parent their parents are having this like full-blown argument. And then later on the next evening, it looks like Laura Linney was like peeling a scab off of her lip. And I didn't know if that was subtle um telling of, did he hit her? Does he hit her? And is that what led to the divorce?
I I didn't take away that he hit her. One thing that's great about this movie and what makes it different from Marriage Story is kind of this is from the kid's point of view.
Hmm.
So you have scenes with just the parents, but for the most part, this story is how it affects the kids, whereas Marriage Story is from the point of view of the adults and how they're affected by it, and how, you know, them having to deal with the fact that they have this child. But in this case, you really, in that fight, you only hear the screaming because you're in the bedroom with Frank and you don't know exactly what's going on down there. But I didn't take away that he was physical. I just took away that he's an asshole and impossible to live with. And so she had been done living with him for a long time and finally had the courage to say, I'm done for good and we're getting a divorce.
Adios, amigos.
Well,
Yeah.
one thing I really love too is is Frank. There wasn't a lot of development on Frank because I think this is the main character of this story for me was Walt. But I loved Frank telling Ivan, his tennis coach, I want to be a Philistine too. And then the subtle use of my brother when he talks to people later on. He's like, when he's talking to Walt, and Walt says something to him, he's
Yeah.
like, "That's good, my brother. That's good." Um,
Yeah.
that always cracked me up because you know it just drove Bernard crazy that he's starting to sound like the dude that's sleeping with his ex-wife.
Yeah. At the point where he didn't know that his kid's tennis coach was sleeping with his ex-wife, and there's this like kind of moment that they have where he's like, "Are you married?" And Billy Baldwin is like, "No." This is kind of this like dumb grin on his face, like, "Oh man."
Nah, man, I am
And then
married.
yeah.
I, the one thing, and the reason I wanted you to watch this movie, it was like the takeaway I had from this movie is Jeff Daniels is so amazing in this at playing a pretentious douchebag that if I met this person in real life, I would get as far away from as possible. Like I couldn't handle being around someone like this. And he's just so amazing at it. Like everything that comes out of his mouth just like rings so true as like, this is who this dude is. And this, and then also he did The Lookout kind of around the same time. Like he is one of my favorite actors because he chooses like such great character type parts where he gets to play different people. And this is probably one of my favorite performances, even though I hate him in this movie.
Right. No, and I think part of what makes it so authentic, and obviously the writing too, but I feel like we all know a super pretentious asshole. Not naming any names, of course, but I think we all know, this one pretentious person. and it's probably easy to kind of draw from that firsthand experience.
So, Alon, now that you've seen it, what did you think of it overall, and would you watch it again?
I really like you were saying, it's a 75 to 80-minute movie, but it's a lot to take in such a short period of time. And it's not really like an uplifting feel-good movie. So it's definitely one of those movies that you have to be in the right mind frame to watch again.
Yeah, I really love this movie. It's exactly 75 minutes before the credits roll, which is just so crazy. It's a low budget movie, so that makes sense. But this movie is so dense. It takes so much attention to watch it. You can't be doing anything else or you'll miss a lot of subtleties. And it's just so uncomfortable. There's so many moments that are just so
Mm-hmm.
uncomfortable to watch.
Yep.
But having said that, I love it. Love the performances. And it's something I will watch again.
Cool. So thanks for tuning in to another episode of I Finally Watched. And I finally watched The Squid and the Whale. My name is Alon.
And I'm David. Bye.